It is official. Sean Diddy Combs has been sentenced in his federal criminal case. We're going to discuss everything that happened inside that courtroom, including the bombshell decision by the judge.
Silence, the kind that clings to your chest and makes breathing difficult, pervaded the courtroom. Everyone in that room was aware that what they were about to see would rank among the most startling events in the history of contemporary entertainment. Diddy was in the middle of it.
It was the day. After 2 years from when Cassie Ventura Fine filed her lawsuit against Sean Combs, after an investigation, after a raid, after the Cassie tape was published by CNN, after an apology video, after an arrest, after multiple indictments, superseding indictments, after an 8-week trial over the summer where Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, but convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, namely transporting people across state and international lines for sex work. He was sentenced for his crimes today. Judge Arun Subramanian in federal court in downtown Lower Manhattan sentenced the rap mogul. Just handed down the sentence a few minutes ago at the time of this recording. Now, to be clear, why this is such a big deal, other than the fact that Sean Combs has been sentenced for federal sex crimes, we had no idea what the actual sentence will be. There is no pro forma mandatory sentence here, like a life in prison. It's just standard. We know what's going to happen. No, there was a range for this judge. The defense was asking for no more than 14 months in prison. And since Sean Combs had already served about 13 months in the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, he essentially would be out in no time if that was the case. The prosecution was asking for 11 years. The probation department that did its own analysis recommended 7 years and 3 months. There was a range. We did not know what the sentence would be. We are going to get into everything that happened today, including what it was like in that courtroom when the sentence was handed down. And to do that, I want to bring back on Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth Milner, Long Crime Zone. She was inside that courtroom, not only for today, for every day of this trial. This is the conclusion of quite a saga. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on. First, I want to start off, how did Sean Combs look? Okay, that was a big question. I know we have courtroom sketches that came out. How did he look? How did he appear? What was his demeanor? We'll talk about the statement he made in court. Just how did he look?
Well, Jesse, you can imagine how big of today actually was for Sean Combs. I mean, he was going to be learning his fate. And to your point in your intro earlier, we didn't know where that range would really lie. Could it be on the tail end of that being time served and he could possibly leave walking out of the doors? We didn't know if that was going to happen. We didn't know if he was possibly going to get double digits sentence. So I think the weight of the world you could kind of feel when he walked inside the courtroom today. He was wearing casual clothes, civilian clothes, so he wasn't in his MDC tan jumpsuit or anything like that, like he was at the last hearing that happened just last week. But today he appeared in a tan sweater, white undershirt, dark pants, similar to the looks that he was appearing in during trial. And then when he walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he waved at his family. He did kind of like a little prayer hand, but he did seem a little bit nervous. And I think it's possibly because they just didn't know where the sentencing would go. And so he sat at the defense table with his glasses, and then the proceedings began. But you can only imagine what was really going on in his mind as soon as he walked in, saw his family, saw the amount of people inside that courtroom, because Jesse, it was a packed house today, body to body, person to person. There was no seat left unseated today inside that courtroom.
Real quick, talk to me about that. I heard there was 30 people in the front rows that were friends and family of Sean Combs. Anybody notable?
So Jesse, today inside the courtroom, it really was a kind of a little bit of a who's who was in there. I mean, everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Keisha Combs, Diddy's sister, Dallas Austin, who was a music producer. He was inside that courtroom today. Sean Combs' children, that being Jesse and Delilah Combs, the twins. It was Quincy Brown who was there. Justin Combs was there. Christian.
Despite his best efforts to conceal it, his face was pale and his hands were quivering slightly. The man who had walked on stage, hosted parties worth millions of dollars, and created an empire with only his charm and drive suddenly stood in front of court, anticipating the words that would shape his life going forward. With paperwork in hand and the courtroom's silence save a quiet ticking of clock resonating off the marble walls, the judge looked down. The gavel then struck. They announced the sentence. The words were ruthless, exact and icy. The years were definitive, worse than his lawyers had ventured to foresee, and longer than anyone had anticipated. The room's air was drawn out. Diddy's eyes widened and his lips opened slightly as though he was having trouble understanding what he had just heard. Time seemed to stop for a second. Then everything broke. He lost his temper. In a flash, he lost the cool, collected manner he had maintained over weeks of public examination and testimony. Trembling with wrath and incredulity, his voice raised. Because it wasn't fair, he yelled,
In support of a harsh sentence against Sean Combs. She had testified against Sean Combs, said that he sexually assaulted her. The defense had objected to her appearing in court today, to providing a statement, and in a shock, she wasn't there.
Yeah, she wasn't there at all. And it was kind of a big shocker, to your point, Jesse, that she wasn't there, because we thought that she would be inside the courtroom, and we were kind of curious who the government witnesses who would be there to give their final victim impact statements ahead of the judge giving down Sean Combs' sentencing. But today, right off the bat, Christy Slavic, who is a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, she said Mia no longer wishes to give an impact statement. She had submitted that written statement, and that the tone of the defense letter, I think, was what really kind of changed her mind as to coming into the courtroom today. And I can only imagine probably how Mia feels specifically. She's using a pseudonym even to testify, even as she's writing letters to the court, because of just the fear that she has been getting in terms of what she believes to be backlash, either from Sean Combs or his fans, or even just the attention that it's that the case has brought against her too. And so I was very surprised that she didn't attend court in person today, but I can understand why, because even the judge said to Mark Agnifilo today that the tone of the defense's letter in response to Mia giving a victim impact statement was just completely inappropriate. And it was a pretty harsh letter, Jesse. I'm sure that you've already read it, but it was kind of a very harsh tone, and it was kind of similar a little bit to her cross-examination too.
Now let's talk about the prosecution. So prosecutors today, they outlined their argument in court. It echoed a lot of what their filings were in anticipation of the sentencing. What were some of the key arguments, the themes that stood out today about why they say it was justified for Sean Combs to have a lengthy sentence? Remember, they were asking for 11 years. How did they justify it today? What were the arguments they made in court?
Well, today, Christy Slavic, making the arguments on behalf of the government, she said that today is about accountability and justice. And she was talking specifically about accountability, Jesse. She was talking about the conduct that was lasting for a 15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice, particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this. But I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Mia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Christy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of in relation to the violence, and that the defendant didn't understand or doesn't understand how harsh his conduct was, and that his respect for the law was just something as simple as lip service. And so, yes, the government was asking for a far steeper penalty and punishment when it came to Sean Combs' sentencing. They were hoping for those double digits, and I think they were kind of opposed to the whole split the baby method, as Christy Slavic said today in court. And so they did want a harsher end of the sentencing today. And I think as far as the judge is concerned and what his ultimate sentence would be, it kind of ended up being a kind of happy medium a little bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. And the defense. Number of defense attorneys spoke. I think almost all of them. You had Xavier Donaldson, you had Brian Steele. What were some of the themes they were focusing on in terms of why Sean Combs deserves a lean?
That the media had misrepresented everything, and that he was being punished for his identity rather than his actions. The guards drew nearer, but left him untouchable, in front of the entire world. This man who had once been larger than life now stood unraveling, and everyone watched. The judge's face remained the same. Her expression remained fixed as Diddy's anger erupted, reverberating around the courtroom like the last fall of an empire. He has maintained an iron grip on the sector for years. The kind of strength that caused even his adversaries to exercise caution. He was the creator of his own tale and the master of his own story. His touch converted everything to gold. The lifestyle, the companies, the clothes, and the music. However, he had become a lightning rod in court due to the same aura that rendered him invincible on the outside. Now, all of the charges, gossip, and unspoken tales about the less positive aspect of his life were presented to him in icy legalese. Here, the same charisma that formerly enchanted millions of people was useless. The courtroom was not concerned about money, celebrity, or legacy. The verdict was all that was important. And the knowledge struck him like a sledgehammer as that verdict translated into years, even decades behind bars.
On behalf of the defense, because Jesse, yes, it was Jason Driscoll who spoke, it was Nicole Westmoreland who spoke, Xavier Donaldson who spoke, Mark Agnifilo, and Brian Steele. That's 5 of his, 9 defense attorneys who all spoke in court today. So as far as Jason Driscoll is concerned, he was saying that the defense says that Combs didn't make money off of the Mann Act convictions that he was charged. And that was kind of a big theme in terms of his argument today, and that the defense submitted 300 cases of Mann Act cases where it talked about pimps and minors being trafficked, immigrants being transported, homeless people being transported, all of that stuff. And so that was kind of the theme, at least from Jason Driscoll's point of view, and that the defense also saying that Ms. Slavic, Christy Slavic, who is one of the federal prosecutors, blamed Mr. Combs for having a drug addiction for 25 years, something that they were also talking about, how he had been addicted to drugs going back at least to 2000. And so a lot of his conduct might be not necessarily excused because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MDC Brooklyn, where she was talking about all of his successful businesses. She was talking about how he started a record label from the ground up. She was talking about his clothing line. She was talking about his television company, that being Revolt, and that's when she started to really kind of get emotional, where she was saying that Sean Combs spent a majority of his adult life really trying to help the Black community, really trying to give back to the community, that he isn't this larger than life persona, he's just a man who makes mistakes. When it came to the other defense attorneys speaking, Brian Steele was just very urging of the judge to please consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma throughout his life. Brian Steele urged the judge to consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma in his life, and that there have been times in Sean Combs' life, especially when he had drugs in his system, that there were times where he had flatlined and that he was trying to be a better version of himself. And I feel like, Jesse, that was really the theme of what the defense was saying, and that these 13 months were really reflective of Sean Combs. He wants to be a better person. He wants to leave the past in the past and be a better person for the future. And so even when it came to Xavier Donaldson, he was speaking about how Sean Combs should receive a just punishment. He brings up intent when he talks about Sean Combs' conviction of the Mann Act charges, and that Sean Combs isn't just a pimp, and that he was talking about his work at MDC Brooklyn, where Xavier Donaldson said, we've had assemblymen and politicians, billionaires in MDC, but nobody besides Sean Combs was there to actually help out the other detainees and the other inmates there. And then finally with Mark Agnifilo, his whole argument was that domestic violence comes with childhood trauma. So I feel like the defense was really kind of trying to pull at the heartstrings a little bit of the judge, and even possibly the public too, because this was their final say to all of the people, all of the media coverage that this case has brought attention to. And so I think at the end of the day, from the defense's perspective, they wanted everyone, including the judge, to just look at Sean Combs as a man who made terrible, terrible mistakes, and whether or not he's been punished enough for it, that was kind of what the judge had to consider today.
By the way, I think it was interesting that I think the prosecution said in response that only one of the 5 defense lawyers who spoke actually mentioned the victims. It was very much Sean Combs focused. Now, I say that because Sean Combs did something very interesting when he spoke. He mentioned the victims. We'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I wasn't in that courtroom, but I will tell you, I reading about this, I could feel the emotion that came out.
According to those close to him, Diddy had never been this way before. He'd gone utterly crazy for a man who usually kept everything under control. His attorneys put their hands on his shoulder and attempted to reassure him that it wasn't over and that they would file an appeal, but he hardly paid attention. His eyes darted across the courtroom, searching for some sign of rescue, pity, or someone who still had faith in him, while his breathing was labored. However, nobody was present. The formerly devoted followers sat still, some averting their gaze, some crying, and many just in awe of what they were seeing. His yelling was sliced like a razor by the judge's voice. She cautioned him to calm down. The words scarcely registered, but he shouted again, asking now, his tone cracking, to respect the court. This was not the self-fashioned mogul who had declared to the world that he had no fears. A damaged guy was attempting to reclaim an already gone reality when the marshal moved forward. He appeared to realize at last that it was over. His speech lost its intensity, and his body slumped. The rage gave me.
That a lot of people were anxious to hear, not only from Sean Combs himself, but Sean Combs' children, who, I mean, we do have to admit, Jesse, they have been through a lot throughout the duration of Sean Combs' civil litigations, all the way going into his federal case, too. And so when the Combs children came up for the victim impact statements, they all came up together. They really were showing kind of a solidified, solid unit when they were up at that podium speaking in front of the judge. I will say the only exception of Sean Combs' 7 children was the fact that his 2-year-old daughter Love wasn't there inside the courtroom. So in terms of who was speaking, it was all of them, again, except baby Love. But Quincy spoke first. And so one thing people have to note about Quincy is that Sean Combs isn't his biological dad. Albie Shore actually is. And so, but what Quincy said when he first spoke to the judge, because he was the first one up, he is also the oldest child too, is that he is our father. In front of us, he's a changed man. Week after week, we see him evolve. Our father will never do anything to jeopardize his freedom ever again. Then Justin Combs spoke next. He's the second oldest son. Justin Combs said, please give our father a second chance. This has been the toughest time he's ever been through. This time saved my father's life. I talk to my father every day. He's changed for the better. I ask you to see my father the way I do. Christian Combs was next, and Christian Combs kind of also brought kind of the personality here a little bit too, Jesse, where he says, you know, I'm the one who people say I look the most like my pops. I studied my dad up and down. He's my superhero. He taught me to treat women with respect. So he said the past year I had to travel across the country to see him for 2 hours. He's changed. I see in his eyes as his twin that he's changed. Please give my family grace and please give him mercy. But really, Jesse, where the heartstrings were with the girls, and that was Jesse Combs, Chance Combs, and Delilah Combs, who were speaking today. Jesse Combs, who spoke first as far as the daughters go, she broke down immediately when she got up to that podium and started speaking. She said, we aren't here to excuse his mistakes. We need him in our life. I lost my mom, her mom being Kim Porter, when I was very young. He promised to be there to keep us safe. Then Chance Combs, she had spoke, and she said that we're just his daughters, but we do need our father. When we talk, he speaks with a clear mind. He's more patient. He's thoughtful. He wants to be a better man, a better father. He's parented our 2-year-old sister from jail, and I saw glimpses of our father. Our sister deserves a father who's present to teach her how to ride a bike, to tuck her in at night before she goes to sleep, something that any kid would want. And then the final child who spoke on behalf of the family was Delilah Combs, and she said that we're scared of the thought of not having our mom and our dad in our life. She says that these are the years that we'll never get back. I know that much of the missing years hurt because we have lost our mom. We already lost so much. Please, Your Honor, give our family the chance to heal together. Not as a headline, but we're trying to do better. And so I think from just like a human perspective, it was very emotional. I mean, you couldn't help but feel for the children, especially his daughters, because some of his children have lost both parents. But, you know, I was wondering, would their impact statement have any sway on the judge, who I believe that had already made up his mind going into sentencing? And so it was interesting just to hear just the emotional impact of what they've been through before Sean Combs was ultimately sentenced.
I think it did. I think it did have an impact on him. He mentioned something about the children later on. Again, we'll get to that. We're teasing it up because it was significant what the judge said. The judge would end up referencing not only Sean.
Route to another object. Fear. The world exploded outside the courthouse. As word of the sentence spread, the mob outside the gates went crazy. Screaming into their microphones were reporters. Some fans cheered, while others sobbed as they yelled. Social media took off right away. Every platform was dominated by hashtags. Some praised what they referred to as justice, saying that the powerful were now being held accountable. Others maintained that everything was staged and that Diddy was being sacrificed to shield other well-known figures who were still hiding in the background. But the noise didn't matter in that courtroom. With his head in his hands, Diddy took a slow seat. His once pristine, expensive suit was rumpled and sweat-soaked. He appeared smaller than anyone had ever seen him before. In her concluding remarks, the judge discussed equality before the law and accountability. No amount of fame or fortune could erase responsibility, she remarked. Like the last nail in the coffin of his public persona, those comments lingered in the air. The features of his counsel were defeated and expressionless. They were aware that the appeals procedure would be drawn out, unpredictable, and unlikely to alter.
His father died. That is especially impressive given the early violent death of your father and the trauma that must have left. So he's appreciating all this, but at the same time, he's hitting all the factors, and he's talking about the evidence that came out during the course of this trial. He just said, Jane says he told her, take this pill, go out there, bleep his bleep, bleep him, I don't care. The court is not convinced this would not happen again. The court has considered the programs. They are outweighed by the trial record in this case. Now I'm wondering here, Joe, are we talking double digits?
I think we're going a little higher. We'll see how high we go. But 5 to 7 at least, and maybe even a little bit more. That's what it's sounding like. And there's an argument that the record supports that. Diddy was extra arrogant, and the length of time, I think, is incredibly persuasive and moving for the judge. Obviously, this is not something that happened once or twice and he got his hand caught in the cookie jar. This was built into what Diddy did. This was his culture, and he was truly lawless, just to put it where it really is. And so, the judge has been very honest about, I don't think that this deters you. And, I tell you, that tracks with me. Maybe we're all wrong, but to go off of what we've had happen and had said and had done and the trial record, that's not unreasonable for the judge to say that.
I am wondering also, Serena, if this is grounds for an appeal, where the court says, I'm not sentencing you on racketeering or sex. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Exploitation and violence against women must be met with real accountability to promote respect for the law. Okay, hold on one second. I'm getting the sentence right now. Okay, here we go. Oh boy.
I'm sweating.
Exploitation and violence against women must be met with real accountability to promote respect for the law. The court reaches a few conclusions. 135 months would be more than necessary. Now, I don't know if that means that that's the actual sentence right now, but 135 months is over 11 years in prison. So over 11 years in prison would be more than necessary. That's what the judge is saying here, Serena. I don't know if that's the official sentence as of yet. We're waiting to get confirmation about that. But what does that say?
Well, just to throw that number out there like that means that at least he was considering the 11 years that the prosecution put forth, and maybe even more than that. It sounds like he's kind of tempering it, like that is more than necessary and it'll be less than the 11. But it also sounds like he at least considered it very seriously as an option.
Now I'm wondering, Sierra, are we talking 7 years? I mean, again, it's something we talked about earlier. Maybe the benefit of the family speaking and the benefit of the work that he's done was not to get to 11 years, but not to go lower than the 5 to 7 range. So that may have been the benefit.
Diddy would be departing the courtroom as a convict rather than an icon. He didn't fight back when the guards finally came toward him. He had chained wrists. The sound of metallic click reverberated more loudly than any of his rants. Everyone in the audience shuddered at the sound. The moment the king of hip-hop was formally overthrown was captured by cameras flashing from all directions. He walked slowly and unsteadily out of the courtroom. Diddy had dominated his story for years. However, he was not present when the story was being written this time. His loved ones were already in a frenzy behind the scenes. Emergency meetings were called by business partners. Deals for endorsements were being halted under his firms. Projects were being quietly terminated or put on hold. In real time, the empire he had built over decades was coming apart. Previously reliable associates were publicly separating. A few posts were removed. Others, who seemed to know him very little, released remarks expressing surprise or disappointment. Overnight, his name became poisonous, and everyone was attempting to protect themselves. Later that night, inside his cell, sources said he was silent, hardly talking, and had been staring at the wall for hours. The man who had before spoken in slogans and sound bites had run out of things to say. He was described by those who saw him as haunted, muttering about unfairness and betrayal, while continuing to try to persuade himself that there must be a way out. He had always thought he could buy his way out of anything, talk his way out of anything, and influence every result. However, this was not like the others. There were no bargains to make, no favors to ask for, and no negotiations. It was the first time Diddy felt really helpless. His supporters were more split than ever, convinced that this was a smear effort. Some people continued to hold on to the image of the man they admired. Others abandoned him, labeling him a swindler who had finally been caught. Old interviews came back to life. Quotations from former adversaries who had warned that Diddy's business was founded on darkness, like his 50 Cent. People started to notice trends in ancient tales, assembling incidents that they had previously written off as rumors to reveal a far more sinister reality. Unnamed industry insiders shared information regarding his private life, parties, power struggles, and manipulation. All of a sudden, everyone had something to say and wanted to get away from him before his fall brought them all down with him. A swarm of people eager to share their perspectives replaced the silence that had once shielded him. He had lost all authority over the industrial narrative. Diddy's name held weight in prison, but not the kind of weight he was accustomed to. According to reports, other prisoners viewed him as a test subject, a trophy, or a target. Others gazed curiously at him. His attorneys promptly submitted emergency requests for protective custody, citing safety concerns and threats, because they could not believe that the man who had once been the epitome of luxury was now eating the same food, wearing the same uniform, and abiding by the same regulations. He was now vulnerable on the inside due to the same popularity that had given him external strength. He will never be known for the music, the parties, or the business endeavors. Instead, he will be remembered for that day in court when the mask came off, the power waned, and the truth about what he had done finally caught up with him. It was a long, cruel, and complete fall. The echoes of the judge's voice continued to follow him as he sat behind those bars, gazing at his cell's walls. This served as a reminder that no empire endures forever and that no one, not even the most